Everyone. Unblocked is a bi-monthly event series where guests are asked questions in an AMA-style format, focusing on questions relevant to early-stage startups and blockchain technology. Unblocked is sponsored by DLab, a startup accelerator and venture studio that sits within the SOSV family. You can find out more at www.dlab.vc. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Great. Well, welcome everyone to today's episode of Unblocked, where my guest is Jalak Jobanputra, founding partner of Future Perfect Ventures, an early-stage venture capital firm that invests in next-generation technology. Jalak, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, how did you first get into crypto? What was your first interaction with it, so to speak?
So it was 2013, and I've been a VC since '99. Was a tech and telecom investment banker before that, and was already decided on launching my own fund in 2013. And I had this thesis of distributed connectivity and kind of decentralization of mainly technology, but I was also thinking about human capital. And I went to a Bitcoin conference in 2013, and it was part of my exploration of more decentralized technologies, and was just immediately sold. and it reminded me of when I first logged onto the internet, and I just felt like we were on the edge of something truly transformative. And I've done a lot of fintech investing. I obviously started my career on Wall Street, and was always amazed at how, as technology has gotten into finance, there's still a lot that is done manually or through intermediaries globally. And I thought blockchain tech and Bitcoin as a start is really going to change that need for intermediaries, and then started thinking about data proliferation and the fact that we're going to have more sensors and devices online. We already do, and they're going to have to transact with each other somehow. And how are those transactions going to happen? Who's going to verify them? Who's going to make sure that there's data integrity, and versus a who, it was a what, and algorithms and smart contracts and computers, and so the world just started making a lot of sense to me, built around the core concept of what crypto could do.
Where was this Bitcoin conference? Just curious.
San Jose.
San Jose, and how big was it?
Oh, it was small.
Yeah.
It was, maybe a couple hundred people. Wow. Those were fun early days, I would have to say, in terms of the enthusiasm and passion. I saw everybody knew each other, and those were special days. And I also think, we're in special times now as the technology gets more widespread usage, and Bitcoin as an asset class takes hold. So different phases. It's been exciting to be a part of it.
And so did you go turn around and look into buying Bitcoin? I'm just curious. Through what platform? Because Coinbase didn't exist.
Yeah. So what is interesting is I made my first major investments in Bitcoin after Mt. Gox, and I strongly believe that any technology, any kind of new concepts need to be market tested. And this is true of entrepreneurs. It's true of technology. It's about seeing how resilient it really is. And I think whereas a lot of people shied away from Bitcoin after Mt. Gox, I became even more intrigued and interested, because the entrepreneurs building, the people who are passionate about it, they didn't go away. If anything, they became more determined to work on the technology and weed out bad actors, and so I and a lot of investors say this, but I think my track record shows that I do believe in being contrarian, and I think that's that's where you can make the most upside. But it's also about kind of thinking about things differently than the rest of the world does. And so while Mount Gox was a big negative to a lot of people, the aftermath of it was very positive for me, and that's when I became much more interested and built this
Mhm.
thesis around the technology.
And so, I mean, since 2014, and even though it's only been 6 years, which is a
Gosh, it
relatively
feels
short,
like
it feels, yeah.
it feels
And so
like
the tech,
decades
exactly, and the
in more
technologies
ways than
come,
one.
yeah, and the technologies just come so far. So, um, today in the sort of blockchain world, what sort of areas interest you?
Well, I think it's pretty much across the board, and the thesis of Future Perfect Ventures when we launched was that decentralized technology and it's blockchain tech. It's with the combination of things like I mentioned IoT and sensors and connected devices, along with the machine intelligence that's out there that will enable smarter contracts and more kind of targeted transactions. So all of that technology combined was going to impact every vertical, just like the internet did. And so our thesis has pretty much stayed the same since 2014. Now, what we invest in, along the lines of what you said, lots happened. So, I mean, there's been more development in this sector than any other technology that I've ever encountered before. And so we have kind of altered what we invest in as the market develops, but the thesis has remained the same, which is every whether it's media, whether it's enterprise, commerce, and obviously financial services. I think has been the first vertical to be impacted, but every single vertical will be impacted just like the
Mhm.
internet has impacted every vertical.
Is there any areas today in crypto that you think are everyone's getting a little bit too far ahead of their skis, so to speak?
Well, I mean, it usually takes about a couple hours for the hype cycle
Yeah,
to take hold and then deflate the next morning. It's quite something as
yeah.
it's hard for me to think of things that are overhyped. I think there's obviously a lot of speculation because crypto allows and enables, by its very nature, uh, everyone to participate. And that means speculators and folks that are in it for the short term profit, and that's all to be expected. It's hard for me to say anything's really getting hyped when I think about the longer term potential of this technology. Sure, things like DeFi, obviously,
Hmm.
back in August, and I don't want to say it was overhyped. There was just a lot of speculation and speculators that were drawn to the market. Um, but I think these are all cycles that used to take much longer to play out, and they're compressed. And I said this back in 2017 during the ICO boom and bust, that at least it happened quickly. And I feel that way about DeFi. It happened within the course of a few months, and we're still seeing a lot of growth in the sector. We're seeing great teams building, and so I'd rather have that hype cycle and that speculative cycle happen more quickly, and
Hmm.
people learn who don't have the experience, and then can kind of pick up and move on and build the longer term projects. So yeah, it's hard for me to look at tech as a whole and
Yeah.
think about anything that's overhyped.
Hmm.
It's more on what you're looking at in terms of time horizon.
Hmm. And so, like you mentioned earlier, that when you started learning about Bitcoin, it was kind of like learning about the internet. I guess this would have been the late 80s or something,
I was
early
more, I mean,
90s.
I'm not that old, but
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just like, just when the internet, I
well,
remember, I must have been 6 or 7. This must have been 1995 or
yeah.
1996. How
So
much of a pain in the ass the internet was. So.
I was involved with the internet starting in '94.
Okay, there you go.
So
Yeah.
not quite
So,
the
but
'80s, but
do you use that analogy when you're explaining sort of crypto and blockchain to people who are outside of the space about what, as sort of a good analogy? It's like, because the analogy I like to use is that it's like the internet in the 90s when it was
hmm
slow,
yeah.
pain in the ass to log in, things like that. And I was just curious if that's something you use, or I've also heard people use the idea of Linux as well, because it's
hmm
kind of like a software at the same time. So
Yeah. I think it's a lot bundled together. And all the debates, and I hear less and less of it, especially in 2020 when there's obviously um, been a recognition that the current technology stacks are not working,
mhm,
and decentralization and open source really can work on solving a lot of the time lags and information flow issues that
mhm,
the bottlenecks that exist in our current infrastructure. So I remember investing in the late '90s and trying to explain to non-tech folks, and that was the majority of the world back then, and who couldn't imagine actually watching a movie through the internet or even buying anything.
mhm,
It wasn't a lot of people buying things. I mean, that's why
yeah,
pets.com didn't do well. That's and so it's the same arguments. It's this doesn't work. I mean, I think a lot of people have the common theme is, yeah, it's too slow. It takes all this time to verify transactions. Well, if you compare that to how long it can take for a wire to clear across the world, it's actually pretty transformational. It's just that most people are not exposed to what really happens behind the scenes, and the
yeah,
fact that they don't actually have control of their money right now. That's kind of a myth that exists, propagated by the systems that were created over
mhm,
the last couple hundred years. So I think it brings up a lot of things people haven't thought about before, and also goes against what we've been taught along the way. And I mean, I would like nothing better for this technology to become invisible, kind of like the internet
yeah,
has become invisible. Mobile connectivity, for a lot of people, but not enough people has become
yeah,
invisible. So so um, so yeah, it's the same things I heard back then. It's there. I always refer to Blockbuster early days, saying we're not threatened by the internet, uh, and um, and it's similar to what we've seen in the banking world. I mean, Jamie Dimon is an example of that. Warren Buffett is another one, and I think people who are ingrained and have spent a career looking at things a certain way and have been successful doing so, it's very hard for
yeah.
them to take a look at things a different way until it just becomes inevitable. My
Well,
job
yeah,
is
no, it's sorry.
to look at things early.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Jamie. I don't know if you saw the comments Jamie Dimon made. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before. Did you see those?
I think I may have seen a
Yeah, glance it.
headline
So,
or
I mean,
two
basically,
that,
he said, yeah, he was a fan of blockchain technology because I think he brought up the point that it just makes transactions quicker, right? There's
mhm,
no reason a wire to France takes 3 days, or there's no reason if I bought Apple stock, it takes 2 days to settle. It's just,
yeah.
those types of things are wild. But he said that, he wasn't a fan of Bitcoin. And I'm curious as to, do you think he's obligated to say that? Because if you said, because one, he can't say that he is a fan because, his bank doesn't have a recommendation on it. And all of a sudden, if their clients wanted to buy Bitcoin, the assets would have to leave the bank,
hmm
so they'd lose assets, and then they wouldn't be able to charge a fee, so they wouldn't be able to make any money. But then also on top of that, it kind of blockchain technology, generally speaking, I think really, because I come from a finance background as well, generally disintermediates banks. And so it puts a downward pressure. So I'm just curious if you think he's obligated to say that just because of who he is and the position he holds.
Well, yeah, I certainly think that's part of it, but he's certainly welcome to do whatever
Yeah, no, of course.
I just think that it's just a fundamental threat to the banking system, including the central banks, and I've written about this in the past, where no incumbent, including a government, including businesses and corporates or startups, are immune to being disrupted, and we've seen it happen over and over again, and we are seeing these cycles happen much quicker than before, banking has already been disrupted, and will continue to be, and we're seeing a generational shift of, the easiest folks to explain Bitcoin to are folks that are digitally native, that don't understand why we ascribe so much value to gold. And I responded to Ray Dalio the other day on Twitter, where he just said, well, all these institutions have bought into gold being the standard. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's a rock. And if you think about it that way, and if you think about a digitally native population, or a population, in these emerging markets that have not benefited from this system, they're looking for something else, and it makes so much sense to them. I mean, like when I was in Kenya, and really, I mean, the reason Bitcoin made so much sense to me was I spent so much time in Kenya and have been familiar with M-Pesa and mobile wallets. And I remember talking to some Silicon Valley investors in 2014 and 13 about Bitcoin, and they're just like, no one's going to store money in their wallet, and these were some pretty well known investors saying that, and Midas list investors, and so. But then you go talk to a farmer in Kenya, and it makes all the sense in the world to them. You talk to an 18-year-old, anywhere, and it makes sense to them. So, I almost view it as a positive when institutions feel the need to verbally attack something, because it means that they've been thinking about it.
Yeah, no, well, it's slowly becoming like, I don't know. Stanley Druckenmiller said the other day that he has some, he owns some of it. So it's all of a sudden, the more and more people talk about it, either negatively or positively, because you have people like Druckenmiller and Paul Tudor Jones.
Yeah.
It all of a sudden becomes a career risk, not holding it, or not even talking about it, or not even knowing about it, which is interesting as well. I think another interesting thing that Diamond said quickly, and not to touch too much on it, but he said that he expects eventually that the Bitcoin, I don't know what he meant, but it would be regulated, and I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, and I'm not even, do you think that's possible at all? I mean, for me, I don't think that's possible, but regulate.
I mean, we've certainly seen governments try to regulate it, with China, with India, although I wouldn't say it was regulation as much of a ban, and it really did hurt the crypto exchanges that were operating. We have a portfolio company in India, Unicoin, that was one of the first crypto exchanges, and they battled and eventually led the win in terms of having the Supreme Court in India overrule the banking ban with crypto exchanges. So it definitely hurt the industry from a customer point of view, because the average person thought it was banned and they didn't want to get in trouble. And but what was interesting was I saw so much entrepreneurial activity in the sector, So a lot of companies and start to emerge, even though it was officially banned, and that's because the fact that the government was so threatened by it, I think showed that wow, there could be something here, and then when people, I was there during demonetization in India when they basically the government deemed certain banknotes invalid. So so people who had money that were all these banknotes were told that they couldn't use them anymore. And these, I mean, there were tons of suicides over this, and it was a really horrible thing to see. And the I think events like that, and we've certainly seen it in Venezuela. We've seen it all around the world, where um, when that starts to happen, people become concerned about their savings, what they're working every day for feeding their kids, for putting their kids in school, and I think that spurred entrepreneurs to actually create even more technology around this. So I think that it will be very hard for governments to ban it. I think
Yeah.
it will get more regulated in terms of maybe tracking. Uh, and but I think too many governments have tried to overregulate. I mean, we've certainly seen it in New York with the bit license, very broad legislation. That was passed, which was kind of ahead of developments in the industry, and a lot of companies left New York, and now the Department of Financial Services is looking at provisional licenses. PayPal actually just received one ahead of their announcement. So we're definitely seeing actually more openness because they realize that this is not going away, and so there may be more regulation around it, but I'm just encouraged by the level of entrepreneurship and
Yeah.
creativity I see out there.
So I actually have some of those banknotes that they got rid of somewhere around here that you can no longer use, which is kind of funny. But I'm like, personally speaking, I'm a big believer in India. Like, over let's say the next 100 years, I think it has a lot of characteristics that sort of set it up for success over the long term. And so I'm curious about what the crypto community is, because it seems like you're plugged in there. What's it like in India? Like, for example, like, why did the Indian government take what appears to someone sitting on the outside such a harsh view on crypto? Do they still take that view, or have they sort of changed tack, so to speak?
Well, India, like China and many other countries, have had capital controls in place,
Mhm.
and we see this in a lot of emerging markets where they're concerned about capital outflows, especially into the dollar or more developed markets. And so they have used these capital controls as a way to keep tabs on the economy and money flow. And I think this policy was just part of that, very similar to China, where they didn't want to see money flowing out; they wanted to see money staying within the country. Um, what a lot of these countries, I think, have been realizing is that we're very interconnected, and that money is the more you try to ban it or impose these controls, the more people are going to try to find ways around it because they're going to be concerned they can't control their money. And I think demonetization was certainly part of that process of weeding out black market money and having people declare their money and pay taxes. A lot of these regions have had challenges in collecting taxes, and so in some ways I think it will, some of these policies, and I know tax collection has gone up, but I think they're not looked at holistically in terms of, okay, tax collection goes up, but what is the effect of that tax collection? Is it really spurring the economy? Are the policies helping who they're supposed to help. And so I think that's the big challenge of India. There's a lot of um, there's still a lot of bureaucratic policies in place there, which they need to relax. I think to really realize their potential,
Mhm.
and that's been the biggest challenge since independence for India. But I'm a big bull on India. I
Yeah.
always have been. I think the government needs to reform. We see some steps towards that. I think 2020 again, it's been transformative as we've seen a diversification, a lot of companies looking away from China for their supply chains, and India certainly has been able, and Apple, has announced some manufacturing there, as have many other countries. Vietnam is another example, but India certainly has the human capital
Yeah, certainly.
to make it happen. So, I think that India is very well positioned. I mean, we're very active in investing there, and and I think I think they just announced that their GDP growth is going to be better than projected.
Yeah, no, they said it's got a lot of raw sort of building blocks, so to speak. Um, that I don't know, set it
Yeah,
up for I think long term
absolutely.
success.
I
Yeah,
agree. I mean, I remember speaking about 10 years ago in a presentation about global opportunities and saying, I don't, China gets all the attention, but
yeah,
you look at demographics, if you look at entrepreneurial culture, I mean, so much of that, like you said, the raw building blocks
yeah,
exist there. And
yeah.
so we'll see what happens in the
Yeah,
next.
we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you approach sort of investing in crypto? What like is there like do you invest in protocol companies or do you feel like that's already done? Do you invest in tokens? What exactly are you looking for when you're evaluating a blockchain or crypto project?
Yeah, so we've primarily invested in equity through our first two funds. We've increased our token exposure as the market has developed. We're not speculators; we're long-term holders, very much a venture model. Going to stay away from any assets that we consider speculative. We want to invest, and even as we look at tokens, we want to see that the fundamentals are there, and we also look at the trading activity around the tokens, and make sure it's not and see how decentralized that trading activity actually is, and spend time with the teams. And even if we're investing in the open market in a token, we still talk to the teams and get to know them and their philosophy. We're in very, very early days. So, and I've said this before, where, the problem with the ICOs wasn't tokenization. It wasn't the fact that, I believe that tokenization is going to take hold. And I'm very excited about what that means in terms of broader access to financial assets and participation by users to be able to monetize their usage. I think there's so much to be excited about along those lines. The challenge is, if and we saw this in the late '90s when you see companies go public too soon, and you have short term expectations put on a company by their shareholders. There's just a mismatch with very early stage technology, and so that's really what we're concerned about when we're looking at the token market. I think there's lots of money to be made in short term trading, but we're not traders. But I'm increasingly seeing that mentality out there. We're seeing lockups now that we didn't have before 3 years ago. And so I think the financial elements of these offerings and the way the teams are thinking about it has also matured, which is great to see. So we're still primarily, I'd say we're like 70% equity, and we'll be in our next fund about 30-70
Hmm.
in terms of equity and more liquid tokens.
I see. And are you like protocol agnostic, or you just focus on a specific ecosystem, or how do you look at
Yeah,
that?
look, I think we're very early in terms of seeing how these different protocols can be used, and I do believe that there will be different protocols for different use cases. Believe that since back, since
Yeah.
pre 2000, 2017, when so it's um, we and then that's why I'd say we're very interested in that middleware. I call it the middleware. Some people call it layer two. But that bridge that sits across protocols and into applications. Because, like, if you look at Bitcoin, it's the most secure, tested protocol out there, and it has its use case, which may change over time, and it certainly has. But this store of value where people can feel secure. Now it depends on what exchanges they interact with, but in terms of the actual Bitcoin blockchain, know that their holdings are secure on that, and it works, and it's sufficiently decentralized, and so I think the other protocols still have to catch up, and then also a lot of the other protocols are trying to figure out who they are, and the rules are changing. I think we were an early investor in Blockstream,
Mhm.
which has had a lot of spin outs out of it. A lot of Bitcoin core developers have been involved with the company. Adam Back is now the CEO, and he was mentioned in Satoshi's white paper. And looking at their evolution, and the fact that they've been criticized over the years, but have been very kind of stayed true to the core of, and no pun intended by saying core, of making sure that the Bitcoin blockchain stays secure.
Yeah.
And
So
so, yeah.
yeah, no. So I'm actually I've heard about Blockstream a ton, and to me it seems like it keeps on changing. So I'd be curious to learn a little
Interesting.
bit more about what Blockstream, sorry, is today. And I thought it was like now they're trying to build a DEX or something like that, or cross chain
So
swaps.
when I say they've stayed true to their core, it's their core philosophy in terms of Bitcoin, and
Hmm.
the tenets of what Bitcoin should be, and that is, I'd say security is at the core there.
Hmm.
Now, in terms of their product offerings, they've certainly evolved. I mean, they are a for profit, but they've done a ton of background, development, have contributed to core development of the Bitcoin blockchain, which I think a lot of people are not aware of how many resources they've devoted to the development of the Bitcoin blockchain. Um, so that's the side that I say, they've stayed true to that. Now they're a for-profit company that also has products and new businesses that are going to spin out, or stay in and continue to develop as part of Blockstream. So, but they were really Blockstream and Blockchain. The wallet was another company that we seed invested in their first round. Those were companies that were there in the early days pre ETH, and were very and have been very devoted to making sure the Bitcoin blockchain stays secure.
I see. And so, what are some, I guess, generally speaking, what are some lessons you've learned about investing in sort of blockchain or crypto related companies? Is it different from your previous investment? Like, are there things that are make them unique, or is it kind of investing in early stage startups is sort of a
Yeah,
universal?
that's a really interesting question. It's kind of like the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
If I really think about it, uh, you know, everyone everyone thinks the paradigm's changed, and it will eventually change, but it takes a long time for it to
Mhm.
change. And that happened with the internet, and that's happening again. I think there was a lot of hype, of, feeling that this technology was going to get out there. It was very obvious that everyone was going to start using it. Any technology does not exist in a vacuum. And you have to bring people along with it. One of the biggest critiques I have of the sector is that it's very inside baseball. It's very, people take pride in all the acronyms, and frankly, the rest of the world doesn't care about that. They want products and applications that will make their lives better. And I'm thinking about the 2 billion unbanked people in this world. I'm thinking about why I got into the sector. It's broader access, just like the internet gave broader access to information. It's broader access to assets and the ability to kind of be in control. It's not only money; it's your skill set. It's to me, an asset is not just money. It's everything that you have. And I think about as long as money is power, how do we allow people to monetize their assets or control their assets? So I think the sector is getting it. I mean, look, I've been fortunate to work with some of the greatest entrepreneurs that exist, and some of the greatest technologists that I've ever come across. But I very much view Future Perfect Ventures' role is to be that bridge between these brilliant minds and the technology and bringing it to the mass market. And that's what I see happening. It's happening much quicker than cycles of other technologies, and I think the fact that it's open source is so exciting that anyone anywhere can create with it, and that's also very different. That goes back to your Linux point. So it's happening much quicker than previous cycles and previous technology. But there are a lot of things that are still the same. Yeah. The average person still doesn't know anything about it and still thinks it's a bad thing. And it'll take some years before that changes.
Yeah. By the way, just a reminder to anybody, if you have any questions, just dump them in the chat and I'd be happy to ask them. But Jalak, you touched on Future Perfect. So what is Future Perfect? When was it founded? What's sort of the thesis behind it?
So I launched the fund in 2014 after kind of working on the thesis for a couple years. I mentioned that been a VC for a while. I saw a bunch of gaps in the VC landscape 7 years ago. One was that I felt like we were primed for a next big wave of technology evolution, and I've written about this where, with the PC, then the internet, and both of those gave rise to different business models, companies like Intel, like Microsoft, like Uber, Airbnb, and that we're now entering this phase of decentralization. And because of my global background, I felt like, there were a lot of opportunities that were not being looked at by early stage investors. And I wanted to start a fund that was focused on this distributed connectivity, this decentralization, but look at investing globally. And there weren't really a lot of funds doing that, or very few at the early stage. It seems pretty obvious now. But so that was one. The other is I based it in New York. I worked a lot with the Bloomberg administration to work on incubator spaces, help launch the FinTech Innovation Lab in New York. I saw the entrepreneurial activity that was taking hold, especially post 2008 in New York, and just knew a lot of great entrepreneurs, a lot of folks leaving places like Goldman to start companies. So a lot of talent that was starting companies. And then the third was, again, another thing that's being talked about a lot now, but wasn't most of my career, was just the lack of diversity in the venture landscape. And I felt it was a real competitive advantage to view the world differently. I'm an immigrant. I've lived all over the world, including Silicon Valley, um, and um, and a woman, and so just had I always had a different point of view than whoever my partners were, around the table,
Hmm.
and I felt like money was being left on the table, and there was an opportunity, and there are a lot of entrepreneurs that wanted to work with investors that had different points of view because they
Yeah.
knew that that would be an advantage for them. So I just saw that opportunity 7 years ago. All these, it was kind of a perfect storm. I mean, it's even more of a perfect storm now than ever before. And so that was really why I never thought I was going to launch my own fund, but I just saw too many gaps to not do it.
Yeah. And so, what are some notable investments or some investments that you're super excited about that you made?
Yeah, there's so many. It's
Yeah.
really exciting to look at our portfolio when I mentioned Blockstream and blockchain. Aza, formerly known as Bitpesa, is a company that we also invested in 2014, very early days. They start off offering basically an FX platform based on blockchain technology that bypass course the corresponding banking system that most Africans have to deal with, and so they start off in Nairobi, have now expanded pretty much worldwide, are now working with multinationals who have the same challenges in transferring money and all the kind of the fees that are associated with transacting with a lot of these developing nations, and so I mean they've had an exciting period of growth, particularly when you saw what happened during the dollar shortage in March, and a lot of these institutions had trouble accessing dollars, and to be able to do it through an alternative system was very useful. And so a lot of these companies have been at it for a while, but 2020 has been pivotal for a lot of them because the world realized that they need, it wasn't just a nice to have or a small efficiency. It was more of a survival mechanism, and those are some great companies out of the first fund. We have, I mean, we just announced an Oxio in the second fund. They just came out of stealth. They're using blockchain principles to create a data exchange for mobile connectivity. When I think about our core thesis, and you know like I said, some of the companies have changed, and I think Oxio is one where it was a team that has this fantastic background in telecom and traditional telecom, and saw this technology that then could be used for a real pain point, which is, I mean, how much do we pay for roaming? Is it, we don't always have access to Wi-Fi. I mean, imagine if you could, if brands, if small businesses could buy and sell minutes on a seamless exchange, so that their customers could always have access to connectivity. I mean, I think it's kind of ridiculous that we're here in 2020 and
Yeah.
you could be in New York and not have access to Wi-Fi. And we're a privileged bunch, and imagine now with all the need for mobile connectivity, and connectivity in general. So they've had a lot of traction in Mexico, and telecom. I've been kind of familiar with that market my whole career, and so that's a team that again is bridging that. This is technology that can enable a vision that they've seen for maybe the last 10-20 years, and it's now possible. And so it's been exciting to see their growth. We have a company called Current, which also 2020 has been really good to them. They're a neobank. I mean, a lot of people talk about Chime, but Current is the number 2 neobank. We seed funded them. They're based in New York, and have been kind of a lifeline for a lot of the underbanked population. They enabled stimulus checks to digitally get to some of the people who needed it most, and this whole alternative. I think neobanks. A lot of people thought would not take off in the U.S. or that there was no need for them in the U.S. and companies like Current and Chime are certainly proving the market otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen neobanks in other regions take hold. Another part of our thesis has it's kind of based on a blog post I wrote about before I started the fund. I think it was in 2013, or it could have been 2012, and it was entitled "When Third is First." And it was, again, taking a look at business models that I saw in emerging markets that I thought were going to take hold in the U.S., but hadn't because of the legacy systems. And it came from my experience in telecom banking in the mid '90s, where like the UK, which is a developed market, they had much better interactive TV. Much better mobile connectivity than the U.S. did in the mid '90s when I lived there, and it was because their infrastructure was newer. And meanwhile, in the U.S., I was working on a lot of cable mergers and acquisitions because they needed to upgrade all their networks. Um, so telemedicine is another area that we've seen take hold here. It's we have an investment called Maven Clinic, which they've been doing well, but really, I mean, it's amazing to see how little telemedicine was really being used in the U.S. versus places like Africa and India. And Southeast Asia, where there are not as many doctors for the population, and so that's another company that has been doing well. We're an investor in the Graph, which is a layer 2 solution for Web 3.0 applications. So allowing data analytics and searchability across blockchains, and that again goes to that middleware thesis of we need to have cross functionality between blockchains, and so if you do think that they're going to be networks of and I have always seen this vision of micro marketplaces that emerge that are connected through different blockchains. We need that analytics layer and that connectivity layer in between, and so that's an area that we're spending a lot of time as we look at our future investments.
You mentioned that you like to work closely with founders, or you like to get to know them. So I'm curious, what are the type of things or characteristics you look for in a really good founder or founding team?
Well, the first is really resilience, and that's why it's so important to get to know an entrepreneur. And I think venture is a people business, and it's about reading people and about. I mean, you can't anticipate everything that's going to happen to an entrepreneur or to a company or to a market, and that's the risk of early stage investing. But you can feel comfortable with who is leading that company and how they will manage adversity, because there will always be adversity. That is one thing that is guaranteed in any early stage ventures. So I really look to see, how do they react to market changes? How do they react to questions that are being asked? Are they threatened, or are they, do they think about it, or do they already have an answer for it? Which is fine. But it's not really about having the answers, but having a comfort with uncertainty and knowing that there is going to be uncertainty, and that there also needs to be a self-awareness, and that's something that I coach some first time entrepreneurs through too is know when you need to reach out, and I think it's important to have that relationship with entrepreneurs, that they know that they can reach out, that you don't expect them to have all the answers, that this is a collaborative effort. That's why early stage
No,
investing
I totally
exists.
agree. Yeah,
And
totally agree.
yeah, so those are all the things I really I look for.
And what are some things that are like red flags, you would say, that are things that are
Well,
indicators? Yeah.
I think it's like the cult of the entrepreneur that we've seen, and I attribute it to the social network, but it's existed well before the social network. But this glorification of entrepreneurship, and this swagger, and this crushing it. I don't think I've ever used that term. I think I think there needs to be a vulnerability that exists now. I think it's hard in the culture, and I do think that's why we also need to have a different culture in amongst VCs too, where it is collaborative, and everyone's figuring it out together. I think VCs can be very useful to their portfolio because we do see a broader array of the market, but the entrepreneur is deep in their market. So I think it can work really well as a collaboration if that's how you view it. And so I think anytime an entrepreneur is too concerned about brand, and again, there are companies that need to focus on the brand, but not the entrepreneur as a brand. I think the company should always be the brand, and so. Um, I think that is a flag. Being too concerned about press, and some of the most successful entrepreneurs get very little press. It's just about being focused on building, and then everything else will follow if you can build something that people use and has an impact.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you bring that up because, at least in my experience or my view, typically some of them, most of the most successful people out there actually hate the press, like don't want recognition and, stay out of the limelight and things like that, which is,
Yeah, and,
I
and
guess,
when someone's on
yeah.
Twitter too much, I
Yeah. I mean, it's a
worry.
double-edged sword because I mean, on one hand, the crypto community lives on Twitter, so it depends on, I guess, what kind of product you're building. But I get, on the other hand, you don't want to be too much in that space. But it's a fine line to play for sure. What other, like, so aside for let's say when you're interviewing a company or a company wants to approach you, what are some other things that you look for outside of sort of the qualities of like the character of the individual? Like, are there specific, do you like it, specific? Do they need to have an accounting system, a revenue model, or cash flow projections? So what are the type of things
Yeah,
outside of
like
those?
at the earliest stage, I think it's good to have a sense of where the revenue may come from. And I'd say crypto is very different than. So when I was at Intel, investing for them, I focused on enterprise software investing, and that's tried and true for for the most part, and so they're business models that work, that have been proven, that you can reference, and there are innovations every now and then, and we are, I think, going to see more innovations in enterprise through the consumerization of enterprise, but overall, it's a lot more defined. When you're looking at crypto, the business models are undefined, and that's what I think is partly so exciting about it, is to brainstorm on and kind of evolve, and as you learn. So but it's always good to have some ideas where the revenue could potentially come from, and what you're trying to disrupt, and who those potential customers or users will be, and how would you get to them. So I'd say it's more strategic, and obviously things change, and so but I like to have that conversation with entrepreneurs, because technology, again, in a vacuum, isn't very useful. And so understanding the market, what I do like to see, which I don't see enough of, is all like a good sense of competition, and it's not only
Yeah.
direct competition; it's who may get into this market, right? And I think a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate incumbents. Incumbents are slow, as we've discussed. They're not terribly innovative and visionary. But once they sense a threat to their business, they will move on it. And so I think knowing where the incumbents or how they may react, and this is where I think an investor, VCs can be very, very helpful, because I mean I know a lot of my network is with the incumbents of companies I've worked with, who've acquired portfolio companies. I mean, we have this huge worldwide network, and we keep in touch with them and understand what they're thinking. I often speak to boards of some of these large companies. I talked to Facebook many years before they came up with Libra. It was when
Hmm.
they had just first started, like blockchain just came on the radar, and it was many years before for Libra. So we have a, if your investor is networked enough, they will be able to also help you navigate that competitive landscape. But I think entrepreneurs need to be aware of where the potential threats
Yeah, totally agree. Too often we come across startups and they're like, "Oh, we have no competitors," or they list one competitor, and I always roll my eyes. I'm like, "This is come on, this is just not." Um, it's just there are competitors out there. So anyway, what are some things? Well, I guess the last question is like, what is something? I guess you touched on something founders underemphasize, which is competition and what the competitive landscape looks like. What is something that you think they overemphasize that you would say is not as important as the founders think it is?
Well, I think it's tough in this age of social media, lots of information, a lot of distractions. That I think sometimes they just get too caught up in the short term. And when I talk about resilience, it's also being able to bounce back from a bad day, a bad hour, and in entrepreneurship. And I'm an entrepreneur, so I get it. Things change, minute to minute, hour to hour, and just kind of keeping an even keel through it. And you're dealing with passionate people, visionary people, but then also asking them to kind of be even keeled. And I think that is actually the secret to success, of an entrepreneur, is being not getting too caught up in the highs and or the lows. I mean, celebrate your successes, but don't, tomorrow is a new day, right? And
Hmm.
for both the good and the bad. And so that's, and again, I think that comes with experience too. And so um, just being able to shake things off and move on.
Yeah, agree. So last question, how can we be helpful, just as a community, to you and to Future Perfect Ventures?
Well, I mean, the entrepreneurs that we work with make us who we are, and like I said, we've been incredibly privileged to work with so many amazing minds, and so I would love entrepreneurs who are aligned with our values, and our thesis to see this technology reach the most underserved, and I use that term broadly because I mean I just think about the fees we all pay, to go about our day to day lives. If we could put it back into our communities, I think we 2020 would have looked much differently. If we had some of these business models out there, and so that's the world we want. We want to see. That's why I started the fund, and that's why we keep at it every day, just like the entrepreneurs. And so, yeah, I would welcome entrepreneurs to get in touch with us. I know you guys have a great program, and this is all about collaboration, and we're in such early days, and that's also what's exciting is that we can collaborate. We can grow the pie because the pie is huge, and it's circular
Yeah.
too, which sounds obvious, but I think there's plenty of success to go around.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to speak.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed the conversation.